You would think that the Chinese government would be only too happy to celebrate the triumphs of their athletes. And last time I checked, just recently, they had 31 gold medals, well ahead of the US on 22, and more than the combined efforts of the 6 top European countries put together. So it's a very substantial, some very impressive performances and terrific athletes, but it's not enough to enjoy the triumph. What we've seen in this last week or so is a pretty striking display of hypersensitivity, petulance, and sheer crankiness, lashing out at offences, real or imagined. For example, there was a Chinese weightlifter who won a gold medal, a female weightlifter, great achievement. The Reuters news agency took a photo and published it of the weightlifter straining with the effort. Chinese officials put out a furious tweet complaining that white Westerners had chosen an ugly photo and that it was all about politics, and said that this was shameless, not realizing that at the point they had put out that criticism, multiple Chinese Communist Party-owned media outlets, including Xinhua, the main national news wire in China, had used near-identical photographs. So, and there are many other examples as well. The host American broadcaster NBC was lashed for showing a map of China that didn't include Taiwan. That, according to Chinese officials, but they put out more tweets, said it hurt the feelings of the 1.4 billion Chinese people. This sort of extraordinary adolescent hypersensitivity, looking for insults and then lashing out.
Why do you think there is this kind of adolescent approach, this insecurity? What is driving that so strongly in the face of such success?
Yeah, the Olympics are just one manifestation of this same psychology. We see the same thing in China's diplomacy generally, the way it deals with the outside world, and increasingly since COVID, where there's been this combination of this sense of a great rising power, recovering its historical greatness and its centrality to world affairs, with an enormous world's second biggest economy and a mighty military rebuild, and yet at the same time this tremendous brittleness. The answer, and I turned to a new book by a British journalist. He's written a book about Chinese diplomacy and so-called wolf warrior diplomacy. His name's Peter Martin, and his book is called China's Civilian Army. And he traces it back to the very beginnings of the People's Republic of China in 1949, where the Communist Party, after they took power and were trying to cement power, in a hostile world where other countries were very suspicious of their communist ideology, where the country was broke, weak, after decades of civil war and strife and foreign occupation. And the countries still got this sense of extreme vulnerability. The first Premier and Foreign Minister of China, Zhou Enlai, called together his inaugural gathering of only 170 diplomats to try and rebuild China's diplomatic corps. Most of them had never left the country. Half of them were university graduates. Some of them were peasants. And Zhou Enlai told them the best way he could equip them to do their job as the new China's diplomats was to tell them that they were the People's Liberation Army in civilian dress. So out of this sense of a shaky and vulnerable beginning came also a sort of militant sense that China has to really work hard and deal with a hostile world. And that combination, even as China keeps rising and succeeding, as it has been at the Olympics as well, still seems to be the animating psychology, which is something the world really has to figure out how to deal with.
And it's a good point, but it is interesting because we had 4 years of Donald Trump where everything was divided. Countries were, sort of separating off and all those alliances were being destroyed. But what is the approach of the Biden administration coming in, and how might that further have China worried?
Well, contrary to a lot of expectations, Joe Biden did not dismantle any of the tough trade sanctions that the Trump administration had applied to China. Instead, what Biden has done is keep all those measures in place while doing something Donald Trump never did, and that is to bring his allies, the US allies, into the fold, to bring them into America's camp and into America's confidence. and to do what two of the senior officials who now work for Joe Biden, who were then academics or outsiders, Kurt Campbell and Rush Doshi, wrote a paper saying that a Biden administration would try to deal with China from a position of strength. What Biden's now been trying to do, I think we see week by week, month by month, is to generate that strength. And he's fundamentally doing it by trying to bring allies together. He created the Quad meeting at the very first meeting at summit level, which of course is the US, India, Japan and Australia. He consulted the G7, the G20, the NATO allies, systematically working through an ever-enlarging group of US allies and like-minded countries, even meeting with Vladimir Putin to try to see what sort of negotiations, what sort of deal he could broker with Putin to at least keep Russia as quiescent as possible. He's yet to meet Xi Jinping, and he's still building America's position of strength while putting in place other power broking type elements. For example, the US still hasn't clarified whether it intends to go to the Beijing Winter Olympics next year or whether it might boycott. The administration has said it's still considering that. So putting all of these options and bargaining chips in position, assembling its allies and trying to generate a position of strength before Joe Biden tries to deal directly with Xi Jinping.
And what of, we talk of the civilian army, but what of the military and China's potential threat from a military point of view? Do you think that insecurity could lead to them becoming a little jumpy in that regard?
Well, I think the two elements, again, sit side by side. The increasing power and scale of modern China, together with that sort of militant vulnerability, if I can put it like that. And so you see, for example, just on Friday, even as the gold medals are rolling in, China's athletes are doing the country proud. And yet on Friday, Xi Jinping gave a speech where he said, we must prepare, we must persist in preparations for military struggle. The whole country, the whole people must commit to preparations for war and military struggle. So this is not exactly in accord with the Olympic spirit of oneness of humankind and peace. It's a very jarring note, but this is the China of Xi Jinping.
Good to talk, Peter, as always. Thanks so much.
Pleasure, Bev.